People ask me all the time, where did sugar come from? That's a good question. And it's interesting where it came from. And what does the word mean? It's an Arabic word, sukra. It's what sugar is, a primal element in our society. But it was one of the reasons why Columbus came to America. He had the maps from the Portuguese 50 years before. Went to Queen Isabella and Ferdinand in Spain and begged them for him to get money to get 3 ships, which he did, to sail to the West Indies, which he thought was the New World, which it was for him. He was looking for sugar. He was looking for lots of things, gold, silver, but primarily sugar. He came back to Queen Isabella and Ferdinand and told of the riches. The first expedition was 3 ships, but he only returned with 2. One of them ran aground. He had to leave the people, his sailors, there. And he came back a year later with 17 ships and 1,000 men. 1 year later, because Columbus was a very good a seafarer. He knew the instruments to look at the stars, and he knew how to get back to that place. That's very unique ability. But he brought 1,000 men back. He looked for the men he left there, and he couldn't find them. He went to the other side of the West Indies, the island, and they were all dead. Well, they had a year to play around, and they played around with the women on the island, and they were killed. So that's the rest of the story on the discovery of sugar. But sugar had been known for years prior by the Arabs. It was being imported into Europe, but people are frantic to find out where it was coming from and how to get more of it. And that's the beginning of our country. And that's why we are here today, because of the trade that sugar produced. That money went back, the sugar went back to England mainly. And sugar in the 1600s was about $1,000 a pound. So who ate the sugar? It wasn't the poor, the rich. It was $1,000 a pound. So sugar became the drug of choice in the 1600s. It was more powerful than cocaine. They had cocaine, or not cocaine parties, they had sugar parties. They made castles out of sugar. They made ornaments out of sugar. They ate sugar as much as they possibly could. Who had the diseases in the 1600s? The rich. Who had the doctors? The rich. Because they were eating sugar. That's why. So the first doctor, let's talk about in England, Thomas Willis. He was the first neurologist. Now, they didn't have any doctors per se. So Thomas Willis would pay somebody that was going to be hung. If he could buy him a new suit, could he have his body after they were hung? And that was very common in those days. So that's where the phrase came, you're off the wagon. So when you were sentenced to death by hanging in England, you had the option to stop at a tavern whenever you wanted to before you got to the gallows. And that was why it was referred to, he's off the wagon. He's drinking. He's on his way to death. So sugar is really part of that. You're off the wagon. You're drinking sugar. You're drinking wine. You're drinking beer. You are consuming massive amounts of sugar. So Thomas Willis, along with Christopher Wray, the architect of the London Bridge, by the way, and he did the drawings of Thomas Willis of the anatomy. And his name is still in Gray's Anatomy, and that's called the Circle of Willis, the circulation to the brain. So there was a lot of interest in anatomy and physiology because people were getting sick. What was causing it? And the answer is sugar. It wasn't known then. So they started to name these different inflammatory conditions like MS in the 1800s. Charcot opened up a brain, looked at the brain, these little white spots on the brain and the cervical spine, and he named that multiple areas of sclerosis. That word again, hardened. To me, that is not a disease. That's an observation of a process. What was causing that? Well, in my opinion, it's sugar. Now, we looked at all these different nerves: autism, hypoglossal nerve, MS, vagus nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve, 11th cranial nerve, the 9th cranial nerve, has to do with swallowing. We call it amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. In my theory, trauma plus sugar equals nerve dysfunction. The NFL has 400% higher incidence of ALS. 400%. Do linemen in the NFL, do you think they eat a lot of carbohydrates, which is sugar? Do you think they have a lot of trauma to their neck? Of course they do. And that's why they have the highest incidence of that disease. So my job, I don't know if it's my job, but it's become my passion. And taking Dr. Dellen's theories, Dr. Cook's theories, adding on Dr. Hamlin's theories, and I'd like to talk to you about that in a few minutes.